Doug, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about the devolution issue and the Scottish independence movement. And what I'd like you to do is to give us some local impression of the devolution movement from your point of view in Scotland today, where we're going, where you're going, and give us some spin on how you feel about the devolution issue.
Yes. Yeah, I'd be happy to do that, Alan. So thanks very much for coming to Morven Road in Bearsden on the north side of Glasgow. That's maybe a good place to start, actually. This part of the city is a nice neighbourhood, but curiously we're faced with some unfortunately rather shabby infrastructure, which is just one piece of evidence that I see in Scotland, a country which has so much to offer, but yet is short and lacking in so many ways. It's a country, for people watching this interview who don't know, a country full of resources, natural resources, intrinsically wealthy, and yet we have some of the worst statistics in the Western world in terms of our health. Here in the west of Scotland, a huge amount of heart disease, obesity, and these are things which really don't belong to, or should belong to a country with the wealth of Scotland. And so, coming back to the devolution question, the fact that Scotland, the Scottish Parliament was reinstated in 1999 was the first part of a journey on to returning devolution power to the Scottish people, I really hope that that's going to continue, because what we have seen, I think, on this journey, on the devolution journey, over the past 10 years or so, since we've had the Scottish Parliament back here again, we are beginning to see positive signs, positive impacts in society about how, when we take decisions by ourselves for the benefit of the people of this country, they can be good decisions, and we make positive changes. For example, there's been the smoking ban, in public places, these types of things, and other decisions taken by the government here in Scotland, right decisions which have helped the country. So more of that, I think, is what the country needs to continue that devolution process.
Okay, in the 1999 Parliament, Americans have almost no knowledge. Most Americans will not be aware of the devolution issue at all, even if they're Scottish Americans.
Yes.
The second thing is, my question is when was the last time that there was a Parliament for Scotland? It's been several hundred years.
It has. There was the last Parliament, Scottish Parliament, met in, it was either 1700, I should know this precisely, but let's say it's either 1706 or 1707, so just over 300 years ago. And that Parliament adjourned. That Parliament sat in Edinburgh, and that Parliament was not disbanded, it simply adjourned. At the time, it was due to meet to ratify the Act of Union, the political union between Scotland and England, and that is an Act of Union which, in my mind, should have been an act of union of two equal nations. And I'm sure that was perhaps the intention then, but nevertheless, the Parliament actually in Edinburgh did not meet to ratify that Act of Union because the powers that be at that time were so worried about the unrest and rioting on the streets of Edinburgh by the populace because they knew how unpopular that Act of Union was going to be. So that is why back in 1999 when the Parliament re-adjourned, the comment was made, the Scottish Parliament re-adjourns in Edinburgh in 1999. It was never actually disbanded.
But what was the reason for the adjournment? What had happened prior to that several years ago?
Yes.
To cause that Parliament to adjourn?
Well, there's been a lot written about it, and there's a lot of things which people can read. But in essence, a number of myths have sprung up around this Act of Union, and how England, the bigger neighbour, came to save Scotland from bankruptcy and all that type of thing. There was a thing called the Darien Project, where the Scottish government, prior to the Union, embarked upon an endeavour in Central America, and I think it was in Panama actually, and tried to set up a colony, and it failed dismally. It was a financial disaster, and a lot of people today would have us believe that the Act of Union was all about England coming to Scotland's rescue to save the Scottish financial system and bailing out that project. If you talk to other historians, yes, that may have had some impact on some people who lost money, but a lot of other people say that the Act of Union came about in order to nullify a potential, because England was at war with France at that time. France has been a long-term historical ally of Scotland, so the Act of Union was more about quelling a perceived military threat than anything else.
Can you give us some the Scottish National Party is going to have a referendum in September 18, 2014. Can you give us some idea of why that is a significant date, the 2014?
You mean in
13, 14.
Oh, okay, yes. 2014, that year, that date, was chosen by the current government, the SNP government, and a lot of people, if you went to a bookmaker's, a betting shop, you probably could have got some reasonable odds on the date, perhaps being June the 23rd, 2014. June the 23rd, every year in Scotland there's a little bit of an anniversary in Stirling. June the 23rd, 1314 was a significant moment in Scotland's history, when Scotland finally secured a decisive victory, where King Robert I, Robert the Bruce, defeated English forces and gained independence for Scotland. So some people were saying, oh well, maybe the SNP government, the Scottish government might choose that date, but no, they've gone for September the 18th essentially for practical reasons. I suppose it's significant in that obviously the government here wants to see a yes vote, and there are a number of things happening in Scotland next year, such as the 700th anniversary of Bannockburn, the Battle of Bannockburn, the victory I just mentioned. So that's happening. We have other national events happening, but
isn't it Bannockburn very much like July 4th, 1776 for Americans? Isn't that really kind of your establishment of independence?
Yeah, maybe if we vote yes and regain our full independence, it may become like that, like an American Independence Day. But to be honest, no, it's not like that at the moment. And again, there's this thing in the Scottish psyche, within Scots. On the one hand, we like all that Bannockburn stuff and Bruce and Wallace stuff. But on the other, there's an element within Scottish society who think that's maybe a little, we actually have a thing called the Scottish cringe, which is not something I personally suffer from, but you do get people in Scottish society who don't like that Braveheart stuff. So and that's probably why, June the 23rd is not, like an American Independence Day. What I think is more likely, in terms of us having our own Independence Day, would be perhaps November the 30th. That is really Scotland's National Day. That is St Andrew's Day. That's our National Day. And in my business, I run a company down in Ayrshire. We employ about 70 or 80 people. We have St Andrew's Day off. It's not a compulsory public holiday, but I think as we go along this journey, and Scots become more confident of themselves and expressing themselves, I think it may actually be St Andrew's Day, November the 30th, which might end up being our bona fide national day, perhaps, as opposed to.
So what's St Andrew's Day? I mean, he's the patron saint.
Yes.
Of Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
But what is the significance of that date?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I can give the exact answer to that. I guess it's maybe a bit like why is what is it, March the 15th or significant to the Irish? St Patrick's Day. I don't know. I don't know where those dates came from, Al, but there will be a reason there somewhere, but that is just one detail that I'm not sure about. But it's also a date which is probably most widely recognised by the Scottish diaspora. All over the world, there are St Andrews societies. You bring together the Scottish diaspora and St Andrew's Day or St Andrew's Night. I know in Chicago, for example, there's the St Andrews Society, one of the oldest in the world, and the St Andrews Society in Chicago. St Andrews, they'll have a St Andrew's Night ball end of November. So it's pretty widely recognised as Scotland's national day, of our patron saint.
Is the question that I would like you to bring my readers or the video listeners and watchers up to date on is the issue of Scottish independence is a mixed bag, using American vocabulary.
Yes.
A mixed bag. And I've been in Scotland now. 45 years ago, I was there for a year, but in the last month, I've been in Scotland, traveling all over, and asking people informally about Scottish independence. And it seems to be a mixed bag.
Yes.
About whether we go or whether we stay. And also, I'm speaking as a Scot, I don't know what the hell is going on.
Yes.
I know that we're going to vote on it, but I don't really know enough about it. So
Yeah.
we feel kind of a tripartite division of your country to I'm for it, I'm against it, and I don't really know enough about it.
Yes.
Can you help us understand that better?
I can try. You know, there's a portion of society here which is engaged, you know, and enjoys the political discussion, are concerned. There's a portion, and the first portion I'm referring to are yes voters. In other words, they wish to see Scotland regain its independence. There's another portion who are no voters, who believe the status quo, you know, the UK, the United Kingdom, is you know, the thing that's going to, you know, deliver a better future. I can't see that myself, to be honest. And as you say, there's a portion of people who are undecided. You know, it's interesting the observations you make, and people not engaging. I mean, there is a lot of debate out there in the media, the BBC, the national broadcaster, for example, the newspapers. So within the traditional media, there is quite a lot of debate. Unfortunately, I think a lot of that traditional media is somewhat biased. But on the other hand, you know, we still do have just under 500 days to go to the referendum, and people, it's maybe too far away. It's maybe too far away for some people. They don't yet have their mind. I do, but you know, a lot of people, it's just not.
It's not on the front
It's not on the forefront of their minds just now. It will come. I really believe it will come. There are signs. I was at a meeting in Bearsden Borough Hall, just down the road here, a couple of months ago. A meeting held by Yes Scotland, who are the campaign group campaigning for Scottish independence. And the local MSP, member of Scottish Parliament, was there, and he spoke. And in the hall there were probably 30 or 40 people from different walks of life who were interested enough to come along on a Wednesday evening to listen to the speakers, to talk about why Scotland should be an independent country again. And the local MSP, Gil Patterson, he said, "You may feel like you're few in number here this evening, only 30 of you or so, but I guarantee you, when we have our next meeting, this time next year, this hall will be packed. There will be standing room only, because people will realise, people will understand this is a once-in-a-generation thing, and they will turn out and they will vote." And if we look back to the referendum, the last referendum we had in Scotland, which was a vote to asking the people if they wanted to see a return, a reopening of the Scottish Parliament, if you like. That referendum was in 1997. And I remember similar discussions, a bit like this, back then. Are people engaging enough? Will there be a good enough voter turnout? And the answer back then was yes, there was a huge turnout. I think it was around 80%. So the Scottish people, when it comes to matters of such huge importance, while it seems strange at the minute that you know, a lot of people don't seem like they're engaging, when the chips are down, I think we're going to see a maybe even higher than 80% this time. I think we could be up to 85%. And that's obviously something to be welcomed, because in a vote as important as this, you don't want
Half.
yeah, you don't want to. You want it to be a clear, decisive result, because if it isn't, one side might start blaming the other about the legitimacy of the result.
What I was here 45 years ago, and when I would talk to locals, older people, they would talk about Scottish independence. It was not a major issue. There were some people that said, yes, I would like to, I would like to be free again, but, and they just kind of passed it off as something that was not possible.
Yeah.
And so what I need you to tell me is what's the time warp between 45 years ago when I was a postgraduate student at New College in Edinburgh and today, because there are at least some people that really do care about this.
Yes.
And what I don't understand is what has happened over my lifetime in Scotland.
Yes.
Why are you bugged by this issue?
Because I look at my country, and I touched on this a little bit earlier, and I said our health, our society, the inequality in our society. I also am in the fortunate position in my line of work. I travel on business, and I do quite a lot of business up in the Nordic countries. And I see countries such as Sweden, Denmark, Finland, countries very, very similar to Scotland. And what they've done with their societies, with their economies. Norway, of course, has massive amounts of oil resource, oil and gas, one of the wealthiest countries in the world. And yet we continue to hear from the No campaign, the unionist side, about how Scotland, were it to become independent, would be basing its entire economy on natural resources. Well, Norway does to an extent, I suppose, but leaving that aside, Scotland also has significant other industries. Tourism, huge. Fishing, we have some of the richest fishing grounds in the whole of Western Europe.
Whiskey?
Whiskey. Whiskey, who can forget about whiskey? I've got 1 or 2 bottles myself. So hugely important industry. So this is a country, not just with oil. And by the way, apparently the only people who seem to think oil is a problem for the Scottish economy are the No campaign, the unionist politicians. The price of oil. There's only the oil's going to run out.
2 weeks.
Yeah, it's going to run out soon. You're going to run out of oil. You're going to base your economy on a failing resource. Well, I'm sorry. We were told that. We were spun that story 20 years ago that the oil was going to run out by 1990 or whenever it was. It's an open secret within the oil and gas industry that the oil and gas reserves in the North Sea, and they're now discovering new fields of Scotland's western seaboard in the North in the Atlantic Ocean, deeper water admittedly, but it's an open secret that what's there is going to last another 40, 50 years at least. So, as I say, the only people who seem to think that is a problem are the people saying, no Scotland, you cannot benefit or have your own natural resource. We want that to continue with the status quo. And of course they would say that because in actual fact, it's now becoming more and more clear to people, I think, after being told that we were a subsidy junkie country surviving in handouts from London, is becoming more and more clear to people that in actual fact Scotland is a very and can be a very wealthy economy and develop its economy better when the decisions are made here by an independent Scottish government. And the people, the political elite in Westminster know that and realise that. And that's the real reason why they're arguing no, because they know that we are such a vital contributor to the UK exchequer and finances.
It intrigues me that when I was, prior to coming to Scotland years ago, that the major issue in America was civil rights between blacks and whites, and Americans getting into the issue of equality.
Mm-hmm.
And it intrigues me that most of my life has passed, and Scotland is now into their civil rights issue,
Mm-hmm.
which is independence.
Yes.
And what's intriguing to me is the parallel between the United States and Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
And the parallel being that back 45, 50 years ago in the United States, a whole host of Americans who happened to be white weren't privy to what it was like to be a black in America. And it seems like that there's a kind of a neo-racism going on in Scotland between the royalty
Mm-hmm.
and the commoners.
Mm-hmm.
And my problem is that I say I'm Scottish, which
Yes.
means absolutely nothing because my great-great-great-great-grandparents came from Scotland. So I want you to tell me and to my viewers, if you see that parallel between the racism of black-white and racism of royalty and commoner in Scotland in the referendum issue.
Yes. I think when it comes to the people in Scotland voting yes, for example, I think for a large number of people, the royal family, royalty probably isn't going to enter too much into that decision-making process. Scotland as a country is far less connected to Queen Elizabeth, the royal family, than the people of England. There is not that same connection. And there are a number of reasons for that. First of all, everybody calls her Queen Elizabeth II. Well, in actual fact, as far as Scots are concerned, she's Queen Elizabeth II of England, but strictly speaking, she should be Elizabeth, Queen of Scots.
But don't the Scots have a feeling of, and this is where the racism comes in.
Mm-hmm.
When I've talked to a number of Scots about the referendum,
Mm-hmm.
and they seem to have a kind of they view the monarchy as kind of
We view it as something which is it's a bit irrelevant. The monarchy to most Scots is not irrelevance, and that is whereas in England it is relevant to a lot of English people, but predominantly I think, this is just my own view, predominantly I think for identity reasons. In England does not celebrate its identity, I don't think, the way Scots do and can. In Scotland, we have huge amounts of history, culture, music, bagpipes, poetry, song, language. We've got, not many people will know this, there are 3 different languages in Scotland. The Aberdonians will probably kill me, they'll probably say there's 4.
Americans would say there's 5 because we don't understand anything.
So we've got, most people are speaking, the Queen's English, as they say. There's also the Gaelic, the old language, which is still spoken in the Highlands and the Islands to a very large degree. And then from my neck of the woods down in the southwest, Ayrshire, Galloway, a lot of Scots is still spoken, a lot of Scots words. So Scotland has a lot of things, and also, of course, in terms of our legal system, education system, and the language and culture, we've got a lot of things that allow us to express our identity, and we're comfortable projecting ourselves as Scots. Whereas, in England, it's a little bit different. I don't think they have those same vehicles in many ways, which is why, for example, you're coming back to the Queen's Diamond Jubilee last year and the London Olympics. There were a lot of street parties, throughout the land, in England I'm talking about, all over England, huge numbers of street parties celebrating the Queen's Diamond Jubilee, thousands of them. But in Scotland, I think there were 2. So that speaks volumes in terms of how Scots regard the royal family. So I would almost argue that because we don't see them that way, the way England does, I suppose, that they're actually normal. They should be normal, ordinary people. But in terms of the yes vote, I think it's not really relevant in the minds of the voters here. They don't. I think we've moved on from that. We don't. Most Scots don't think that the Queen or the royal family or Prince William are actually any better than you or me, and that's why we don't really get hung up about them too much.
Okay, now this is an American who was Scottish.
Okay.
Generations ago. It seems to me that it's not so much that the royal family is significant to a Scot as much as the royal family and royalty. I think it neuters the Scot, not so much that I'm in awe of the Queen, as much as I'm a commoner, and I'm not capable. And I've asked numerous people in Scotland.
Yes.
And they all come back with, not all, 75% of the people come back saying, maybe Scottish independence is a nice idea, but they really, it's kind of fear and trembling.
Yes.
If we get independence, we got to do it ourselves.
Uh-huh.
And what irritates me is that the royal family, and this goes back to the racism issue, the royal family has convinced the Scots that you essentially are different than we, and we can take care of the country, and they have no legal issues. They do.
Yes.
But they can take care of your destiny.
Yes.
And that's the thing that troubles me, that there's a disconnect between, and it goes back to racism. And I don't want my American listeners to listen to this and hear that when I use the word Uncle Tom as a divisiveness about blacks.
Yes.
That's a misunderstanding.
Uh-huh.
But I think that lots of Scots have kind of an Uncle Tom issue. Mm-hmm. And the Uncle Tom issue is not black-white, it is royalty commoner.
Yes.
And I have heard this said more than I want to hear it. For example, what happens if we become independent? We're going to have to come up with ambassadors to other countries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, I know. There's all sorts.
And my issue, my God, you ought to be able to do that.
Yes. Yes.
But I don't think they think that. I don't.
No, I think once you start, what vast majorities of the Scottish public have been fed has come from years, decades of misinformation.
And that is no different than black-white racism in the United States.
Right. And so we're now in a situation where we've got just under 500 days to go to, the independence referendum. I mean, at the moment we've got an SNP government, Scottish National Party government, majority government in Edinburgh. And I remember just a few years ago when at the last election for the Scottish Parliament, people were saying, "Oh my goodness, if we end up getting an SNP government, the sky is going to fall in. The nationalists, they'll destroy the country." In actual fact, the opposite has happened. They've been very, very prudent. We're under tight. We get handed a certain amount of money from London every year, despite generating huge amounts of wealth. All that wealth goes to London. They give us a budget every year, £30 billion or whatever it is, and then we need to spend that accordingly. And given the mess that the British government has got, not just Scotland but the whole of the UK into, because of deregulation in the financial sector, we're now under severe austerity measures. So the budget that the Scottish government has been getting, despite us generating all this wealth, has been reducing. Nevertheless, the SNP government have been, in my opinion, have been doing a decent job in being prudent with that budget. So I think the sky hasn't fallen in. People now accept that the Parliament, if there's a referendum tomorrow, do you want to get rid of the Scottish Parliament? It would be a resounding no. That Parliament is here to stay. They know it's got its faults. It doesn't do everything well, but it's an expression of the Scottish people and the people's desire for self-governance. And so I think as we get towards the yes vote, people are going to come up with the things that you say, but these things are based on fear, because it's understandable. Some people, well, we haven't done this before, and we've been told for so long, we're not capable, and we can't do this and we can't do that. We're too small, too wee. But once you start to point out to people that countries like Sweden and Denmark and so on manage these things very well, how can they afford embassies? Sweden doesn't even have oil and gas. How can they afford it? Well, actually, they share an embassy with the Danish. They actually share embassies together and share diplomatic functions throughout the world, so they actually save money. And that money that's saved, well, that can be spent at home to help the people in need of help in society, and so on and so forth. So you start to engage people with those sorts of conversations, and you point out to them that the existing setup, that the status quo, the UK government wastes billions of pounds on things that are not important to people in society in Scotland. And if you ask most folk in Scotland, do you like the idea of weapons of mass destruction, nuclear weapons, nuclear missiles being stored on a naval base just half an hour from here? Most people are going to say no. And then I say to them, well, if you don't agree with that, then you need to vote yes to an independent Scotland in the referendum next year, because only by taking these decisions can we get rid of these things. So I think it's going to be different arguments and discussions for different people. Some are going to be worried about the economics. Others, like the Green, people who support the Green Party, hate the idea of nuclear weapons and on our soil. So there's different arguments, but the main overriding argument, I think, is it's about myself. It's about my children. It's about every single person who has a vote in this country next year. It's about us. It's not about the politicians, David Cameron or Alex Salmond or anybody like that. It's about us as individuals and our belief in ourselves. And, we're actually able to, man up and take
Thank you,
these
sir.
take these decisions by ourselves. And if this country votes no in 2014, I actually get a little bit ill thinking about it, but I can just see it. If we vote no, we'll have lost a chance. It'll be a generation or 2 generations before we get another chance at this again. In the meantime, what will happen is the politicians down in London will then go back to doing what they do best, arguing. The Labour Party will argue with the Conservatives, the Conservative Party will argue with the Labour Party, and the Liberal Democrats will, go with the flow and see where it makes more sense to or with whom to side with. And we'll then, 6 months down the line, look at ourselves and think, what have we done?
And I don't have the data to prove this, but it seems to me that relative to the size of Scotland versus England, is that what we in the United States view as British English are really Scots as far as inventions and social progressives. And I wish that I had a documentation about 85% of this and 25% of it.
Yes.
And I do not understand why I give concern about Scottish independence when I'm not going to live here.
Mm-hmm.
But it bothers me that I'm talking to a lot of people in Scotland who feel that they're not capable of doing it, when in fact a whole host of inventions, a whole host of political and movement forward have been done by what Americans consider English or British, when in fact they're really Scottish. And the Scots don't feel that these people could do it. Why can't I do it?
Yeah, I know. There's something. There's a couple of things in the Scottish psyche which are quite peculiar. I don't know if it's a Northern European thing. It's a good observation. It's an observation which you probably see most here in Scotland itself. Yet when you have Scots abroad, we boast is maybe the wrong word, but we enjoy, if we get into if we're in a social situation abroad and people hear I'm from Scotland and you're from Scotland and you bump into expatriate Scots abroad, there's a positive outlook. There's an optimism there, but curiously that disappears when a lot of people come back home. But on the other hand, there is something within the Scottish psyche where maybe it's the Presbyterianism that runs through the veins of your average Scot, meaning we're not showy. We don't hang out our washing, as they say. We don't like to show off. The dare I say it, the dour Scot, and so that's somewhere, that's maybe burned into the psyche a wee bit, perhaps, which is maybe why we behave like that a bit. But I think that's changing. I think people are becoming more positive. People have been travelling more, and when you go abroad and you see how things are in other countries, and you come back here and you see the state of some of the things, there's an increasing sense of, this isn't right. How can this be? And I hope we'll see the manifestation of that in a yes vote next year.
Yeah, I tell all my students in college back in the States that if you go through an academic 4 years in college and you graduate, you have not learned until you get outside of the isolation of the Americans.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Canada is the 51st state of the United States.
Yeah.
Canada will not like hearing that, but that's essentially it. And Mexico is a combination of drug lords and golden ghettos of recreational places for Americans.
Yes.
Outside of that, America has no contact with the rest of the world day to day.
Yes. Well, yes, and I think that's right, and people's understanding of what's going on in this country. A lot of people. I lived in Germany for 4 years, and a lot of people in Germany, I think it's the same in the United States. A lot of people think of the UK as England, or Scotland being part of England, and it troubles me that the UK government doesn't. I don't know. I don't have any evidence for this, but if countries around the world are getting something as basic as that wrong, you would think the UK government, in the interests of promoting an equal union. This is meant to be a union of equal countries, Scotland and England, with the Union of 1707. You would think that they would sort out inaccuracies in people's perception of what makes up the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, but they haven't. So this idea that we're all England seems to be perpetuated and reinforces, in my view, the fact that this union that Scotland is in is actually not an equal union. It's an unequal union. There's imbalance in it, and in some ways I can understand that, because there's 60 million people living in England and only 5 million Scots living in Scotland, and so in many ways that's understandable. The politicians in London, they are going to take the decisions based on the interests of 60 million people living in England. But if they would only just admit that and come clean about it and say, that's how it is, then...
But then they're going to give you an argument.
Yeah, well, exactly.
So
yes.
So I'm going to lie to you to perpetuate. It just, it bothers me, and it bothers me that the three major issues that upset me are Tibet, Burma, and Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
And the similarities between all three of them is independence.
Mm-hmm.
I love my grandchildren.
Mm-hmm.
I love my wife. I love teaching. I love art history. I love.
Yes.
But the three troubling issues are independence of people.
Yes.
I've been in Tibet twice. Hope to be in Burma in a couple months, and I've been to Scotland twice.
Mm-hmm.
And it just bugs me that we are. It bugs me that I'm technically not a Scot, generations back, but I'm not a Scot.
No, if you move here and live here, Alan, then you can become a Scot.
But I'm not Burmese, and I'm not Tibetan.
Mm-hmm.
And it ticks me off that I can't. It ticks me off that I'm so upset about it, and other Scots.
Yes. Yes. Well,
and it goes. I guess it's partly it is partly that whatever the dominant culture is has made the less dominant culture feel like Harry Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom.
Mm-hmm.
And it drives me. I mean, I don't want to explain it.
Mm.
It bothers me that Scots are living like the Uncle Toms.
Yes.
I mean, it bothered me back when before I came to Scotland.
Yes.
The big issue was civil rights in America.
Yes.
And I took people down south and
Yes.
was afraid of getting killed and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So that was an issue for me.
Yes.
Black-white relation.
Yes. But
why?
I think there is maybe a difference. I mean, your sense of injustice, I agree with a lot of that, and I share a lot of that in terms of, when I look at Scotland today, and I think what Scotland should be like.
You look at it, but lots of Scots don't, and
Yes.
lots of whites did not look at it in the United States.
I agree, but lots of Scots don't because, as I was saying earlier, I think with the mainstream media and press, people do believe the things that they've been told over the past decades, unfortunately. So that's why some of them perhaps don't share that sense of injustice. I think as we get towards the referendum vote next year, more and more people will, because a whole bunch of stuff will come out. And just one of them, for example, is the Macron report. This was a UK government, Westminster government sanctioned report written in the mid-1970s, commissioned by the Labour government at the time, as to the economic viability of the North Sea oil. This was just after it was discovered. And in that report, written back in the mid-70s, for the government, it was stated that, because it coincided with, at the time of an earlier Scottish independence movement back in the 70s, and this report wrote that, or said, that were Scotland to be an independent country, it would be as wealthy, if not wealthier, than Switzerland. And that report was marked top secret and buried and hidden from the Scottish people until just a few years ago, when it was obtained under a Freedom of Information release. So all these kinds of things are happening, are coming out now, and more people will get to know of them as we get closer to the referendum, and so I think that sense of injustice perhaps will increase. But there's maybe another important thing to mention why some people may not have a sense of injustice in terms of what's happening in Scotland. We have, despite everything that's happened, we have retained some very, very strong institutions in the country. One being the church, one being our education system, and our legal system. All these three things are different from the country of England. So in many ways, I think a lot of people may feel, well, we have these things, so we really do still have our Scottish identity. So the Scottish identity as such, I don't think has been. I don't think there's a sense of injustice as far as an attack on Scottish identity is concerned. But what I think is important for people to understand is that there should be a sense of injustice as far as the economical state our country is in. And that, I think, that probably will, I hope it needs to come, so that they understand that by doing things ourselves, we will be in a better position economically, both economically and socially.
Yeah, and regardless, you decide what your country is going to do.
Exactly.
And if you succeed, fine. If you fail, fine. If you're in between, fine. But it ain't what's happening down in Westminster.
No, and
that's
yeah. This is it. When somebody, any of my friends, say to me, and I'll say to them, do you really believe, if we vote no, that the things you complain about, the things you're not happy about, the infrastructure, our health, if we vote no as a country, do you really think when the dust is settled and the UK politicians get back to arguing among themselves, that when they wake up in the morning, when David Cameron and George Osborne, when they wake up in the morning, are they going to be thinking, right, let's see how we can make Scotland a better place and really ensure this is an equal union and ensure there's no imbalance between the nations of these islands? They're not going to be thinking that. They're going to be thinking other things, but it will not be the interests of the Scottish people that will be at the forefront of their minds, and that's why we need to bring more of that here, and we can only do that through independence, I believe.
And when I started several years ago, when I started getting involved in this, I started to. I assumed from what I was reading that Scotland was going to go to the euro, and now and I don't know historically when it started to come up, but the pound is going to be maybe the money.
Yes. And
when I was here 45 years ago, use of the Bank of Scotland pounds was fine in Scotland, and was pretty universally accepted in the border areas. Mm-hmm. But once you went down in London, you couldn't use it. And I told that story to everybody I've talked to up here, and they said, in many cases, it's still the case.
It is. It is still the case. And
I get
not everywhere. I've had that happen to me. Scottish currency. It's pound sterling, but the central bank here in the UK is called the Bank of England, and which brings me to the point I was making about we're in an unequal union. Symbology is important to people. Symbology, I think, is important to nations. We keep hearing from the Westminster politicians that we're meant to be better together in an equal partnership and all these things. The symbology is not evidence of that. It's called the Bank of England. Should have changed it at least to the Bank of the United Kingdom, and so we're the diminutive partner or diminutive side in this relationship, and that's the way it will continue. That's a really, really important point. If we continue the way we are, we'll continue to be a second string on that fiddle, and that cannot be good for the future decision making of this country.
And that denudes you as a person to carry out whatever you can do in your life. It keeps you from aspiring to what you can do.
Yes.
And that goes back to the whole issue of racism. I wrote an article some time ago about royal racism.
Yes.
That is royal racism. I'm telling you that you're diminutive, in your words, to who you are.
Yes.
When in fact all the history that we should have known.
There's no doubt in my
the Scots haven't been diminutive.
There's no doubt in my mind that a large part of us, the Scottish people, being told that we are better together, stronger together, weaker apart, all this rubbish. It's frankly rubbish. But there's no doubt in my mind we are being told that in order to protect the interest of the status quo. And the status quo means there's a political elite establishment in London whose interests will not be served if Scotland chooses independence. So I was talking about the fact that Scotland exists in the eyes of, I think, some, not all, but some within the political elite in Westminster, exists to preserve the interest of the larger state. And we can call that the UK, the British state, aka England, because there's 60 million people living in England and only 5 million Scots. And in many ways that's understandable. Don't have an issue with that, but at least they should come clean about it, which of course they won't do. But just last week, I think it was, there's a politician who sits in the House of Lords, Campbell, and he came out in the newspapers and said, if Scotland votes yes in the independence referendum, that will damage the interests of the UK. And I thought, yes, thank you, Ming. Finally, a senior politician has come out and said something from he wishes the UK to remain, but he's at least being honest in saying that Britain's interests would be damaged. Now, what he means by Britain is, and what a lot of people in England will understand by that comment, is that England's interests will be damaged. That's fine. That's, well, it's an admission which tacitly admits and recognises that Scotland is not in an equal union. And if people understand that, then they won't be voting to stay in an unequal.
But it's unequal to keep me as England superior.
It is, and so.
And how? And tell me, as a Scot, how is that different than white-black racism?
I'm not sure it is different. If you have one person thinking
Then I'm better than you.
Then they're better than another, that's is there a difference? I don't think so. You can vote the politicians out in London, but you can vote some of them out. You've got the House of Lords. But that's another subject altogether. Reforming the House of Lords. You've got hereditary peers, people in the House of Lords.
Because I was what?
Yes.
I was born.
Yes, I was born a Lord. I have a seat in the House of Lords because my father was on the King's side at the Battle of such, and that's just obviously a nonsense. But they've been talking about reforming the House of Lords for years and years and years and years and years and years and years.
And the Reformation of the House of Lords is going to go as slowly as the Reformation of Scotland, unless the Scots put their foot down.
Well, Scots are being told by the No camp, who wish the status quo to remain. We are being told, if you vote no, we'll give you more powers. Well, Scotland, you can have more powers. We're just not going to tell you what they are yet. Just vote no first, and then we'll decide what else we can give you.
Nothing.
We've fallen for that old trick once before. What's that saying? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on us. And there was a devolution referendum back in 1979, which was actually a yes vote.
That was 46 or 48%, wasn't it?
It was 51-4.
Oh,
it was a yes vote for devolution back in 1979 for Scotland. The vote was carried, but there was some skullduggery which went on, which demanded that there must be I think it was at least 40% of the electorate, i.e. 40% of the people on the electoral register must vote in order for the vote to be carried. And that didn't happen. And curiously, people who had died, but whose names were still on the electoral register, obviously they couldn't vote because they were dead. But so if you're on the register and you hadn't voted, you were counted as a no vote. So there are all these kinds of special rules happening, and so it was a yes vote, but it was denied because of those sorts of reasons. So, and in addition to that, what the Scottish people were told by the Conservative government at that time was, vote no and we'll give you something better. And then it took well, 20 years, 1979 until 1999 before we got the Parliament back. So we've fallen for that old trick once before. So if we're going to get additional powers, tell us what they are now, before the referendum vote, and allow the people to choose. Allow the people to choose. But they're not going to do that. So, we've been at that destination before.
Okay, that's a microcosm. Let me tell you a mini Arab. That's a macrocosm. Let me tell you a minicosm. I teach art history in the United States, part of one of the classes, and in 05 or 06, the British voted on the painting which they possess in the British Isles as the most important one. Doesn't have to be British painter, but anything that what they possess, which was the greatest painting they possessed, and they voted overwhelmingly in favor of William Turner's The Fighting Timberer.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. I taught art history to undergraduates when I was an undergraduate as a teaching assistant to a guy named Louis Palmer who helped me immensely.
Mm-hmm.
An undergraduate teaching undergraduates. I mean, I was a senior teaching juniors in college as a subsection. But at any rate, Turner's Fighting Timberer has been my favorite painting, not of the British Isles, favorite painting, period. Mm-hmm. And so I am so left of center on the issue of Scottish independence. And I knew it had to come to Scotland.
Yes.
Or it didn't have to come. I wanted to come to Scotland. But it took me a while to process going to London to the National Gallery to see the Fighting Timberer. Mm-hmm. I emailed 4 or 5 different people in the National Gallery and asked them whether they would let me interview them about the significance of that painting.
Yes.
I wrote at least a half a dozen emails. I got one email back from one woman who said, "We don't do interviews. We're out here to show pictures, but we're not involved in interviews." I called her from Crown Point, Indiana, and said, "I'm the one who's written all these emails to you. All I want to do is talk to you about this painting, talk to somebody. I don't have to be the head honcho." And she said, we just do not do that for people. That's below us, and we're too busy." Mm-hmm. So I must have said something to her that sounded dejected, and she said, "Well, I'll check into it." And I told her the day that I was going to be there, the time I was going to be there, and I said to her, "If I can just talk to somebody for 10 minutes, I will take you and that person out to dinner, or lunch or dinner, afterwards on my way to Scotland." I went there on Tuesday when we just flew into London. We met, and she wasn't working that day. She said that she would talk to the curator of that department, and I talked to the front desk lady, and she said, "I'll go up and talk to him." She came back in about 2 minutes and gave me several names of the books that I ought to buy talking about the Fighting Timberer. I've taught this since 68, 69. I know as much about the Fighting Timberer as the National Gallery. Mm-hmm. And I said, "I just would like to talk to you." And they said that the curator said that they don't do that. So that happened. Mm-hmm. So, and then I went into, I think it's Gallery 34, and I've been to every art museum, major art museum in Europe, and many of them in the United States. I knew the back of my hand. I have never seen more people standing in front of the tugboat hauling the fighting timber to dry dock to be disposed of. The greatest ship in the British Navy. And I don't know of any, none. It's the greatest. And they would come up and stand in awe of this painting 15 minutes and then move on. We were there for an hour and a half. 10 or 15 adults came in, they would leave, and all of a sudden there'd be 15 or 20 or 30 or more first and second graders coming in. And somebody from the British Museum would stand in front of the fighting timber explaining exactly the same kind of things that I explained in my PowerPoint of the fighting timber to these little kids. And these little kids loved it. They ate it up. Then the kids would move out, more adults came in, and that repeated over and over and over again. They had a British Museum personnel teaching the fighting timber to little first and second graders. I have no problem with that. But I have a problem with the English not taking somebody from America seriously about American interest in a British ship. And it's and my point is, it is a replication of exactly the way you people are treated. That if you yell enough and scream enough, we'll give you something. But just please shut up.
Yes.
But if I guarantee you, if I were an English professor in London and I wrote to the National Gallery, I swear to God they would have cleared out the gallery just to let me stand there for 10 minutes.
No, I agree. You know, what you've experienced, you know, we get that. You know, we send, you know, we more than pay for our way, and then we feed off the scraps from the Westminster government table, and we're supposed to feel thankful for that, and feel guilty if we put up our hand and say, no, this isn't good enough. And you know that's come from decades, you know, centuries of being told you're too wee, you're too small, you're too poor, you're not clever enough, and that has sunk into, you know, the Scottish psyche, unfortunately. But it's changing. That's, you know, I want to be very, very optimistic and give out a positive message about this. It's changing because people have seen over the past 10, 15 years that if we, you know, that they're starting to sense, they're starting to know that actually we've been spoon-fed a whole bunch of rubbish about what we can't do and all the rest of it over the past decades and centuries. And you know, so there's a really positive message there for the country. And I think as we progress towards September 2014, more and more of this positive stuff is going to come out, and people will sense that. I think that Scotland, you know, really does have a date with destiny, and I hope and pray that we get that vote.
And that date with destiny is going to be determined by Scots. If you look at the civil rights movement was not started by whites. It was started by blacks. And it was years after that. And name a significant white supporter of the civil rights movement. I mean, I can name a whole mess of blacks, but whites finally caught on to it.
Yes.
The same thing happened among women. Women did not get liberated by good liberal white males.
Yes.
And the same thing is true with Scotland.
We're not going to get liberated by generous Westminster politicians. No,
Damn straight.
absolutely not. Absolutely not. We are going to, get that, attain that by ourselves, and each and every individual in this country. We need to look at ourselves. If we can get people to look at, not at the politicians and what they have or haven't, because this vote next year is not about politicians. We need people to look at themselves, to myself, to look at ourselves, and to look at the future, but not the future necessarily for myself. I'm in the second half of my life now, but look at the future for our children and our grandchildren.
And your grandchildren.
Yeah.
And their children.
Yes, and their children. That is the key thing, that we need to set them up with the ability to really determine their future. So that's what this vote is about. It's not about Alex Salmond or the politician of the day. It's really about giving ourselves and our children and grandchildren the ability to decide their own future. So that's a really, really powerful message. But there'll be different messages for different people. Will vote for different reasons. Some will vote to get rid of nuclear weapons. Others will vote because for economic reasons. But I think the overriding one is, and no one can argue with it, is do we trust ourselves, and can we look at ourselves and feel comfortable, and we make decisions in our daily lives about how we spend our money, how we run our homes. So it's in many ways it's an extension of that.
And this is the last thing. I really appreciate this time with you.
That's all.
But it is within your power, not your personal, but Scottish power, to make that decision. And the beginning of Scottish independence took place during Hadrian in the Roman Empire.
Yes.
And they wanted to kick Britain out of Scotland, Scotland out of Britain. And that has been a problem for 2 millennia.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, this is my pledge, I will do everything as an American who, interestingly, is not only a descendant of Scotland, but also a descendant of the American Revolution,
mm-hmm.
where we got our devolution. Devolution is not an American word. They would not know what devolution means.
Mm-hmm.
But devolution was the 1776,
mm-hmm.
when we had the same problem.
Yes.
And fortunately, because of the geographics, we were able to pull it off.
Yes.
And if I can do anything for Scotland or Tibet or Burma,
mm-hmm.
at 70 years of age, I still got lots of time left, and lots of energy and lots of writing and lots of teaching.
Keep spreading the word, Alan.
Douglas, I really appreciate it.
Me too.
This has been the best interview I've ever had.
Oh.
And I guarantee it'll be on my webpage, it'll be on Facebook, and it'll be on YouTube.
Okay. Well, I've enjoyed the talk, our discussion, and thank you so much for coming, and no doubt we'll have 1 or 2 more conversations of this ilk.
We'll have more than 1 or 2, I guarantee. Thank you very much.
Okay.